for those of you who have not had a chance to experience Bruce in these webinars, you're in for a treat. He is one of the world's leading experts on the impact of trauma on development and how trauma explains and impacts how we behave in the world. His work is very widely disseminated. At this point, even further widely disseminated thanks to his latest book with Oprah Winfrey entitled What Happened to You. And if you haven't read that book, I highly suggest you check it out and pass it along. So I feel very fortunate that our work in this community has been so informed by his work so closely. And I think that collaborative problem solving has evolved and developed in exciting ways, in many ways, directly due to the influence of Dr. Perry's work. So I'm grateful to him as a friend and a colleague, and for all he's done in the world, and for us particularly, helping to push our thinking forward. So great to see you, Bruce, and wonderful to have you back. So appreciative of you sharing your time with the community. I know people are eager to hear from you, so Bruce, great to see you and have you here. Take it away.
All right. Well, first of all, I always love hanging around with Stuart, and he's a good friend, but also really one of the smartest guys I've met ever, and really incredibly open-minded about continuing to learn from all kinds of people. You know, the people he does clinical work with, other colleagues, people who disagree with what he says. He listens to them. He's actually been, I've learned a lot from Stuart as well about communication and about really the direct, in the moment clinical application of many of the concepts that we talk about in our work. And so one of the things I want to talk about today, and I know a lot of you know a little bit about what we do, but as by way of background for those of you who don't know, the permeating framework that we use when we try to understand people and families and communities and history and culture, all of it is what's going on in the brain. What are the characteristics of the human brain that are involved in healing? What are the attributes of the human brain and the way it works that allow us to grow up and create a worldview one way versus another way? How are these, how is our brain organized in ways that allow us to transfer information from one generation to the next? There are, I think, so many questions that are bubbling up in our society today that are better understood, I think, if you know a little bit about the way the brain works. And this includes stuff like understanding colonialism, right? Understanding how systems resist change, understanding isms like racism or misogyny. Where does all this stuff come from? And when you look at it through the lens of the brain, through neuroscience, developmental neurobiology, you see some things that can help you understand. Now, I just want to make it really clear, you don't see everything. The neuroscience lens is just one lens of many that you should use to try to understand human beings. And I think this is one of the great things about collaborative problem solving, is that, working and talking with Stuart, we basically both have this tendency to temper our perspectives, right? To sort of go, that's an idea, So, and I think that I just want to leave you with this before I kind of jump right into some of this other stuff, is that a lot of the stuff I talk about in the brain, and talk about the brain, and the brain does this, and the brain's organized this way, that's really only a distillation of the real complexity of the brain. And in some ways, the very act of trying to summarize it and make it easier to understand brings in inaccuracies and distortions and things that need to be always kept in mind. So it's not these things I'm going to talk about aren't the answer to everything, but there are some really helpful and useful bits of information that can help us understand people and move our work forward. So I'm going to hone in on just a tiny little bit of that work in just a minute in relation to collaborative problem solving, and particularly the plan B process of having this iterative relational interaction with somebody. So all of our work really started from me being trained as a neuroscientist before I got trained as a clinician. So when I came into my psychiatric training, I already had a PhD in neurobiology and had been studying neurons and neural networks and receptors and receptor effector coupling and, you know, the things that people talk about now and call them epigenetics. We'd been looking at that in very simple models, you know, isolated tissue culture, looking at it in a lot of different ways. So I knew a lot about how the brain develops and how the brain changes. And I was particularly interested in what are the things that make neural networks change. You know, what makes a neural network sprout more axonal connections, make a stronger and closer synaptic connections to influence the transfer of information in that network? How is memory formed? How is that related to learning? How is that related to development? How is that related to therapy? How is that related to sport? You know, there's a lot of things that we do in our life that are really require the brain. And so many things that we do in everyday life are brain mediated, right? Every time you have a conversation with somebody, there's two brains that are really actively involved, you hope. You know, now sometimes, you know, one of those may be a little less involved than the other, but we'll get to that later. So I came into this sort of with this theory of change that what I was doing as a therapist was trying to influence the brain, change the brain. And part of what I came up against really quickly was that, yes, the brain's important. The brain's mediating thinking and feeling and moving. And if you really want to intentionally bring about change in any of those functional areas, right? Help improve somebody's motor skills, help improve social skills, help improve cognitive skills. You had to somehow influence systems in the brain that were involved in that. And yet here we were, I knew that the brain was ungodly complex, you know, and I've shown this for many, you've probably already seen this slide, but I just show this to kind of give you just a tiny little perspective on and this is only a partial granulation of what's going on in the brain. We haven't even gotten inside the cell here. If you get into the DNA and everything else, it gets even like infinitely more complex. And so the bottom line is the brain is way more complex than we can really truly understand or comprehend currently. And so we're all forced to use models to create oversimplifications. And in the big challenge for people that are trying to translate neuroscience is that we have to basically oversimplify in ways that leave some things out, in ways that distort other things, and so forth. And so for 30 years, I've been working on trying to create a model or models of important aspects of the brain that can capture things that are true without distorting too much and without leaving out too many things. And one of the things that we've basically settled on is we have this primary heuristic, a primary model, this upside down triangle brain. I think many of you may have seen this. What we're trying to capture here and illustrate is that you've got these different anatomical areas. And if you look at the systems, the neural networks that are coursing through these different anatomical areas, you'll see that they mediate different functions. So there are networks in the lower part of the brain that predominantly mediate simple regulatory functions. And then you go all the way up into the top part of the brain, the place where we think and we can tell time and we have speech and language. Networks up here allow us to do these things, to do these uniquely human functions. Now, again, those of you who are neuroscience purists, function is not regionally localized. It really is a product of multiple systems working in complex ways, but it is accurate to say that cortical systems are necessary for speech and language, even though they may not be independently fully sufficient for speech and language, if that makes sense to those of you that are purists. But let's back off of that for a second and basically say, here's a model. The model of the brain. And one of the things that I knew about this, and one of the things I was studying, was the development of these very, very, very important neurotransmitter networks that originate in lower parts of the brain. And you've heard of all of them: serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, and they were important in the questions I was studying, because not only in the fully organized brain are they able to directly mediate or modulate every single function in the body, either directly or indirectly through autonomic nervous system, neuroendocrine, immune system, or direct innervation, they were also crucially important for driving development. So if you take a fully organized brain and you look at these core regulatory networks, collectively, they reach everywhere, right? So you can influence speech, you can influence feelings, you can influence movement, you can influence the immune system, you can influence, anything, any organ in the body through these networks. And because of this architecture, these became sort of grand central station for the stress response. And that's kind of what we were studying. But to my earlier point, early in development, before they were fully organized, before your brain's fully on board, right? And you all know the brain's not fully developed at birth. It develops in a sequential way as you get older and older and older. And that sequential process is driven by neuronal activity that comes from these core regulatory networks. So literally during development, as these systems organize and spread out, they're playing a major role in how the rest of the brain organizes. And so back to my point, now I'll tie CPS in here in a minute, but so I knew all of this stuff. I knew about the crucial role of these core regulatory networks in driving development. I knew about their role in mediating lots of different functions. I knew about the role of these systems in essentially creating the set point or the homeostat for your own stress response. So the irony about activation of the stress response, these networks that mediate the stress response, is that if you activate them in predictable, moderate, controllable ways, you literally promote healthy development. And if you have a system that's abnormally organized or not functioning well, you promote healing in those networks. You build resilience and you promote development and therapeutic change. But if you take those very same systems and you activate them where there's no predictability, and it doesn't have to be big, it doesn't have to be big extreme activations. Just ongoing unpredictability and a sense of uncontrollability leads to abnormal functioning of these networks, which then leads to a cascade of problems in every part of the body and brain that these systems innervate, right? So you're all familiar with the ACE studies, right? Physical health, mental health, social health, everything. It doesn't go as well if these systems have been activated in these extreme, prolonged, or uncontrollable ways. And we can talk a little bit about what's in this big bucket, but it's the stuff that you would expect, right? It's isms. It's being excluded because of your color, because of your body shape, because of your gender orientation. It's getting nonstop signals from people around you that you don't belong. Or it's being physically abused or sexually abused or exposed to war or all kinds of the more traditional, easy to identify traumatic events that people can experience. But those things lead to a stress response system that's overly reactive and at baseline overactive. Now, here's where CPS comes in. What we know about therapeutic change is that the brain changes and neural network changes with timelines that are very, very, very different than the timelines that we've invented for therapeutic help. So if you look at the dose of therapeutic experience that the typical individual gets when they're in mental health care, it's 1 hour a week. Now, you hope that positive things happen outside of that therapeutic hour, and that's part of what your therapeutic work does, is to try to enhance therapeutic experiences outside of the office. But the reality is, that's kind of a weird dose if you understand how the brain works. Neural networks really don't change in response to hour-long experiences. They change in response to literally seconds-long experiences, seconds long. But those experiences that are seconds long have to have a little bit of a refractory period, a little bit of a space where you don't activate it, and then you reactivate it. And so there's this dosing and spacing phenomenon that's so important in promoting change in neural networks. And so I knew about these, if you will, these time constraints about what leads to optimal change in physiological systems. And I think that the place where most of you can kind of connect with this is if you know a little bit about, cardiovascular training or neuromuscular training. You don't go in and lift weights for an hour, right? It's not a nonstop hour of pumping weights every, you go in and you have literally next time you do this, time how long it takes to do 10 reps. It literally does not take that long, but you do 10 reps and then you rest, and then you do 10 more reps and then you rest, and then you do 10 more reps. And you can literally you can provide a pattern of stimulation to your muscles that promotes positive growth and change in about a minute and a half by having 3 reps of 10. That's exactly the same thing that's the kind of pattern and dosing that changes the neural networks in the brain that are involved in all these things that we're trying to influence. And that's the beauty of collaborative problem solving, is that when you engage somebody in this collaborative process where you are relationally present with somebody, you engage them in a moment where there's a little bit of a regulating dose. Your presence, the fact that you are going to do some reflective listening, you're going to actually be present and interested in what they have to say, will project to them, because human beings are relationally contagious. They will literally feel the intentionality of your goodwill. They'll feel it. They'll feel that you really do want to understand them. That will create a state in them where they feel more regulated. Now, again, I don't have time to go into this, but human beings are relationally, we're social creatures. And one of the hallmarks of our species is that we survive as groups. And so when we are in the presence of people who are sending us signals that we belong to with this group, we belong, we feel safer. And the moment we feel dysregulated and upset, what do? We flock. We look around the social milieu to try to see if there's somebody out there that is saying, I'm with you. I'm in this with you. I know what that is. I will help you. So little kids on the playground, they fall and they get hurt. They scrape their knee. They're like, oh my God, this is distressing. They look up over at the parent or the grandparent, and the grandparent sends a signal. It's okay. It's all right. Now you can freak it. Now, if you're a parent who's like over dysregulated yourself and a little freaky yourself, you'll kind of get upset, and then they get upset. You basically co-escalate the kid instead of co-regulating them. But by and large, the point that I was trying to make is that when you feel distressed, the first thing and the most important thing for your brain is to know that you are with your clan. You are with people who make you feel like you belong. You feel safer. And so when you are doing therapeutic work, doing a plan B interaction with somebody, just the fact that you're willing to be present with them and you send the nonverbal signals that you're really engaged. And watching Stuart model this kind of communication is masterful, and I know all of you who are learning how to do this watched him do it, and you're like, oh, I can do that. And then you try to do it and you're like, God, how does he do that? It's a lot harder to do than just like mimicking his words, right? It's the ability to truly be curious about that person. What's going on? I want to understand you. People feel that. But when that happens, there's this moment, and it's brief. where they feel safe. And when they feel safe, they're more likely to open up their cortex to be able to be willing to be in a relational engagement with you, and then willing to hear what you have to say. And so the beauty of collaborative problem solving in the Plan B process is that it's really the only therapeutic approach that I'm aware of that is continually attuned to the state of the individual in a way that's adhering to what we refer to as the sequence of engagement. You know, what we know about the way the brain's organized is that there's these systems in our brain. As information comes in from the outside world and from interoception, the inside world, we process this information in a sequential way. The first part of the brain to get that information is down here. And then once it's processed, it goes up kind of into this middle part of your brain where there's a more complex form of processing and integrating and interpreting. And then that gets passed up to the smartest part of your brain. And so the process of being with somebody, you're sending and projecting tone of voice, you're projecting physical proximity, you're projecting eye contact, you're projecting nonverbal cues that are opening and are trying to promote a sense of safety and engagement. And that goes down here and that gets processed. And if it passes muster, I mean, if that actually, if that person feels regulated enough to kind of trust that, then they'll go up in here and they'll begin to interpret and be more relationally open and more capable of further relationally mediated work. But if they feel like you're insincere and you're just saying the words, that they'll basically activate their stress response, they'll keep their cortex shut, and they'll continue to do that defensive behavior that has protected them in relational interactions in the past. Now, I think a lot of you have seen, the version of regulate, relate, reason, where we've sort of superimposed that sequence of engagement with the traditional Plan B process. And I think that's really what I mean when I say that collaborative problem solving is really the therapeutic approach that adheres to the timing and the timelines of the way the brain changes. So you can have an effective Plan B interaction that's 4 minutes long. It doesn't have to be an hour of therapy. It's 4 minutes long. But the beauty of it is the parent can do one, the teacher can do one, a therapist can do one. And over the course of the day, a child can have 5, 6, 7, 8 healthy therapeutic experiences where they kind of move up this regulatory ladder, go up and they go up and they go up. And guess what they're having? They're having a whole sequence of predictable, moderate, controllable stressors, right? They're having, somebody starts a Plan B conversation with them and they get a little bit activated and it gets plateaus and then they disengage and then they go back here. And you go back in here and you do this. And again, Stuart will talk about this and has talked about this a lot. I believe that the therapeutic impact of doing collaborative problem solving isn't solving the problem. It's the process that you undertake. And the problem is the vehicle for the process, right? If it's your shoes, we had one that was classic. It was a kid had all kinds of problems, right? Suicidal, aggressive, history of abuse, bad self-esteem. But the vehicle for providing therapeutic interactions was an honest query about why don't you want to wear your shoes on the floor, on the unit. There's got to be a reason you're doing that. It's the process that's the change, I think. Now, of course, ultimately, you do kind of want to get to, the cognitive part. I like the cortex. The cortex is a great part of your brain. But I think that the beauty of collaborative problem solving is that it's fundamentally regulatory, it's fundamentally relational, and then it has the capacity, of course, to be baseline cognitive. Not a lot of therapies can do that. And not a lot of therapies intentionally do that. and are aware of where they are on the sequence of engagement. Is this kid here? Are they here? Are they dissociated? Are they disengaged to the point, are they terrorized? Where are they in this process? And so I'll stop in a minute. But I just want you to always remember that the moment you interact with somebody, the first part of the brain that's going to process what you're doing is this very reactive part of your brain. It's going to take seconds long interactions. And it will feel, for example, if there's a millisecond delay that suggests to them that you're disengaged from them, right? So like if you're talking with them and you sort of glance over the shoulder and somebody's talking to you, bam, they feel it. And they're going to go back to being dysregulated. Or they're going to go back to categorizing you as another one of those adults that really doesn't care. And so part of the dilemma, part of the challenge of any therapeutic interaction is the capacity of the therapist to be present. Because those little moments don't work if you aren't present. Now, again, the beauty of that is you don't have to be present nonstop for an hour. But when you do that initial stuff, you got to be there for a minute or two. And then you can take a rest period. Then you got to go back and you got to be there. Then you can take a rest period. Then you got to be there. And I think this is where the art part of doing collaborative problem solving comes into play. But ultimately, as you do that, as you work your way up the central nervous system, your interactions as they become more regulated, these become more relationally enriched. And as the relationally enriched interactions become more solidified and repeated, you can go up this ladder faster. The more you repeat these Plan B conversations, you'll get up here quicker. And then ultimately you will get into the cortex to do the kind of cognition and reflection on, let's walk through that plan. Let's think about what would happen if we did that. Do you see how that would work out? You literally are being able to activate different parts of the brain, the problem solving, and then the reflective anticipation part. Again, every single part of the brain has an opportunity to get adequate dosing and spacing for positive therapeutic change. And so no matter where the predominant networks are that are underdeveloped or disorganized, collaborative problem solving gets you where they are and lets you keep working at it until it gets organized to the point where you can go a little bit higher. It is fundamentally a neurosequential intervention. And that's one of the reasons I like it so much, because it, as I said before, it puts in place the elements that we talk about all the time in the neurosequential model. And I'm going to stop there.
I got to say, Bruce, listening to you, and I've heard you talk a lot and worked with you a lot. One of the reasons I love working with Bruce is I'm always learning from. I mean, I think folks, I've never met somebody who combines such knowledge with such humility and such compassion and a skill of making things accessible, complicated concepts, making them accessible. And as you can tell, and he's just touching on little pieces of his work has become, it was super relevant to begin with. It has only become more relevant and the applications more relevant over the last few years. So check out his work more if you're not familiar. And Bruce, thank you so much for sharing your time, your wisdom with us. We all love it. We grow so much from it. And it's a great way to send us all into the weekend here. We appreciate it. Great to see you, my friend. Everyone.
Great to see you too. See y'all.